Welcome back, friends. A lot of you starting out in Photoshop will run into the issue where you see a bunch of people using some cool brushes online and you really want to be able to get started with a brush set that you find useful for you, but it's hard to know where to look. So to remedy that, what I thought I'd do is I'd spend some time and give you guys a crash course into pretty comprehensively creating whatever brush you want to have whatever effect you want. So what we're going to do is start with just the default round brush, and we're going to use that to build up our own brush set with a bunch of useful, natural feeling, traditional media brushes. So let's get started. Well, first of all, what I want to do is create a brush that has a little bit more bristles and teeth to it, so to speak. So what I can do is with this default round brush, you should have one that's got a little bit of pressure sensitivity to it. So I'm going to grab that pressure sensitive round brush. If you can't find that, just hit F5 to open your brush properties. Just check on transfer and that'll be just the same. So I'm going to dab this around and just vary the pressure that I'm using on my tablet. You will need a tablet for this. And I'm just going to start making some sort of random shape here. So something like this. And for this workflow, what I want to do is I want to be able to set up a action that allows me to create a brush from whatever layer I have selected. So I'm going to go into my actions panel. If you don't have that, just go to window and check on actions. Once you have that actions panel open, you can just drag it over to your tool shelf or wherever you want to put it. If you're seeing this button mode or you're not seeing anything at all, you can just hit this button mode, which is going to switch between the action mode and the button mode. So just ignoring what I have here, I'm just going to create a new action. And we'll call it convert to brush. We'll hit record. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to control click on the layer thumbnail. It's going to make a selection. I'm going to go edit, define brush preset, and I'll just hit OK. And you'll see now I've got a brush here and I've still got a selection. So I'm just going to hit Control D to deselect. And then I'm going to stop that action. So now let's just test that out. I'm going to put a few marks down and I'm going to hit play on this convert to brush. And you'll see it's made a brush from that shape that I made. So to make this even more useful, I can double click on this and I can bind that to a function key. So I already have one set up to F9. So what that allows me to do is make whatever shape I want. And you'll see when I hit F9, it will have made that brush for me already. So I'm going to close this down now and let's start building out this brush. So I'll make a new layer and I'll hit F5 to open the brush settings. If that doesn't work for you, you can go window, brush settings. Mine's set to F1, but F5 is default. So now I can start editing this. So I have this shape. I'm going to bring the spacing down to something like 3, just so that's stamping it more frequently. I'm going to introduce some transfer. And at the moment you can see, just based on the shape of and I'll keep deleting and adding a new layer just so we can keep previewing this. Just based on the shape of the silhouette of this stamp, I can influence that brush. Under shape dynamics, I can also turn on flip X or flip Y jitter. And that's just going to flip it in either this direction, which is Y, or this direction, which is X. So if I turn X and Y on, it's automatically going to start adding just a little bit of grit to this brush. I'm also going to, with angle jitter, add direction. So now it's going to follow the direction. So already, like you can see, just after those few simple tweaks to this stamp, we're starting to see a little bit more of a traditional feel to this brush. So I can introduce a little bit of roundness jitter, and that's just going to change how thick or thin that is. You can also control that using this little gizmo here. So you can see that's really thin and that's full thickness. I'm just going to reset the angle. So roundness jitter is just going to randomly scale that in and out from big to small. So that's another fun way of just adding a little bit of grittiness to the brush. So what I can do as well is just change that initial angle. So at the moment the stroke is going from left to right like that using this stamp. But if I grab that and tilt it to the side just slightly, you can see it's got more diagonal vibe to it. So I'm looking for something that kind of feels like a brush. I'll go into transfer. Let's turn on flow jitter as well, just so that tail end of the stroke is a little bit nicer. So let's go with that for now. I'll set it to a default size that I'm going to find useful perhaps, and we'll go brush 1. So I'll switch this off. Let's make a new layer and let's use this brush to make more brushes. So I'm going to dab out kind of like another silhouette, and you can see how much variation I already have, how much interest and texture I'm already getting just from this one brush that I've made from that default round brush. So what I'm thinking about now is I want to make a shape that kind of has more like a square silhouette to it. So I'll hit F9 with that action I set up, and now we've already got our second shape. So in brush mode, I'll select that new one. Let's hide this and make a new layer. We can edit that again. So I'm going to do a lot of the same steps now. So I kind of like that as a base. I'm going to save it for now. But how can we make this a little bit more visually interesting? Well, one thing that's nice to have in brushes that gives them a bit more texture is to add a little bit more randomness and breakup to the stroke. So a really nice way to do that is ticking on dual brush. Now, your secondary brush selection will look different to mine, depending on what brushes you have. And for whatever reason, it doesn't add the new brushes right down the bottom. So you'll want to search for the brush you made. So I can see mine's here. So with that dual brush now, it's going to scatter that brush inside the bounds of the brush I created. So if I up the spacing, that'll be more obvious. You can see how it's dabbing that at various angles. So if I turn transfer off for a second, you can see it's kind of influencing. If I turn it on, and I'm holding this lightly, if I press firmly, you won't see it. But as long as I press like somewhat lightly, you can see it. So what I'm going to do in transfer is I'm just going to drag up the minimum pressure on those two. So I've still got transfer on, but with both of these on 95, it's just going to increase that contrast. So now what I can do is I can bring the size down, I can decrease the spacing, I can scatter it, I can increase the count. So now it's going to be scattering in that brush inside the silhouette of whatever stroke I make. And this will really quickly just add sort of a little bit of randomness. It's almost like I've got a roller with paint on it that's kind of unevenly distributed. And I might bring the transfer down a little bit. That's just going to add that sort of faded edges on the strokes. So pretty fun to just use a little bit of randomness and thinking about shapes to come up with some more interesting brushes. So let's make a new shape. So this brush is going to be a little bit different, but using the brush I just created, I'm just going to carve away like a base shape that's got some randomness to it. So something like that. Hit F9 while I have brush selected, and it will automatically switch. So this time I'm going to make a secondary shape whose sole purpose it is to be a dual brush stamp. So I'm going to grab this and add some angle jitter to it. I'm just going to dab this around and let's just see what that does for us. So I'll hit F9 and that'll save that, but I'm actually going to go back to this brush here and I'm going to search for that shape we made. So I've selected that brush. We'll turn transfer on so we can see it, and I'll drag out the spacing. I'm going to keep the size for this one quite large. We'll keep the minimum transfer quite high as well. Reduce the spacing, and now you can see what's happening is that if I do this slowly, you can see it'll stamp it very slowly as well. And what I'm looking for with a brush like this is I'm going to save it and let's just use it for a bit. Call it Chunky Roller. Now I can select it in my eraser, and I'm testing for some level of randomness with the brush strokes that I can kind of just dab it, and it's going to allow me to create some really cool graphic shapes. Let's say if I was doing some kind of environment painting, for example, and I used something like this, I would want it to create maybe some harsh rocky transitions or something. So I zoom right out. I really like these kinds of brushes for all the happy accidents that they give me. So it's got some grit to it. It's got some randomness to it. And that randomness really helps me stay loose when I'm doing things like compositional sketching. So this could be some kind of landscape. I'm just sketching in light or dark shapes at the moment. And if I switch between the brush and eraser using that single brush, it gives me so much character. I can find some really cool happy accidents. So I'm pretty happy with that brush. So now I have something decent in my arsenal in terms of brushes to where I can create some graphic compositions. What I want now is I want to take a nice stamp like this maybe, and I want to add a bit more softness. So I'll choose one of these other soft brushes, and I'm just going to soften this transition. I'm going to start making some brushes that are good for laying in color, still have some kind of directionality to them, but I'm just using this eraser tool with this brush I've already made and just adding a bit of softness. So let's try something like this. We hit F9 again, and already you can see because of that soft silhouette I gave the stamp, I'm getting a lot of softness in the brush. I'm just testing X and Y jitter to see if that's something I might want for this one. I might keep them off for now. I'll set angle to direction, and I'm going to add a slight tilt just so that it has a little bit of thickness. But you can see that's got already like a lot of character. So let's say I was laying in color, some kind of grassy color. Well, what would I want this brush to be able to do for me? Well, first of all, when I rotate it like that, I'm not sure I like that it has that randomness on the end of the stroke. I might change that later, but for now we'll keep it, and let's add some color dynamics. So we'll set our hue, saturation, and brightness jitter to some low values by default. And if we zoom in, you can see that's just adding a little bit more grittiness to the strokes, making sure we have that set to apply per tip. Right? And sometimes you might find that leaving the spacing up actually gives a little bit of tooth and texture to the stroke. And it's also going to showcase that color jitter a little bit more. And we might do some transfer. And what I might do in shape dynamics is I'll turn off direction, but I might hit pen tilt. And that's going to mean as long as you have a Wacom stylus, depending on which angle I'm pointing my brush, it's going to affect the stroke. I'll just choose an angle that I think works for me for this particular brush, just based on how I like to hold the pen. Maybe something like that. So I'm thinking something like this is quite a nice brush for just laying in some textured strokes on a landscape, say. And I'm still just playing with direction here, just trying to decide what's going to work for me. I think I might keep it on direction because when I do turn these corners, having the brush follow that is going to just mean that the edge of the stroke has that soft blend to it. So if I'm using this for something like grass, that's probably something I'm going to want to keep in the brush. So I'll go soft, painterly brush. So I want something now, maybe finally, where I've got a brush that's got a bit of grit, painterly gritty brush. So I'll reset my colors. And for a gritty brush, we need a gritty stamp. So I'm going to stamp around, erase around, and I want lots of holes in this brush. And I want the silhouettes of these little holes to sort of be like a uniform size. Let's see what that looks like. Save it out with our shortcut. Start a new layer. So I've got some kind of grit in that. Again, not going too fine with the spacing is going to ensure that I still have that gritty feel. Flip X, flip Y. So this is quite nice so far. Bring the spacing up again. We'll go direction, tilt it like before. And to add an extra layer of grit, I'm going to use that same brush. And it's cool to just have fun experimenting, right? Like something like this, I could save out and use as like a dry brush that has some speckledness to it. Maybe instead of angle jitter set to direction, I could do pen pressure. That's just going to introduce a little bit of randomness, and something like this, pretty quickly starts to feel like a natural feeling brush. I'll save that as gritty random, and let's keep painting and see what else we can find. Again, if I want to randomize that stroke even more, I can introduce a little bit of angle jitter, maybe a little bit of scattering. Call this speckled. And any brush that has a little bit of scattering, let's just color in a section here. I can select the smudge tool, select that brush, and you can see how good that works as a blending brush, as a smudge brush. That's good for blending and adding a little bit of texture and grit. Now that we have this shape, hit F9 again. And look at this, we've already got some kind of really soft, almost airbrushed look. Something like this could be like almost like a charcoal brush. I could reduce the thickness of that to sort of simulate that feeling of charcoal held at an angle or something. Again, just looking at jitter to add some randomness or grit, or dual brush just to see what works. So now I can lay down a stroke, go back to that smudge brush, and you can see how quickly, just using a combination of those brushes I created, I can create a lot of variation. So let's say I had a ball, for example. I'll just lock transparency and just lay in like a highlight, maybe bounce light on the bottom. And I use that brush, smudge brush, and we can pretty quickly indicate, some kind of material, and even unlock transparency. And if we smudge around the edges, pretty quickly we've got some kind of furry ball. I'll save that as charcoal brush 1. And you can see now that I have a few of those brushes to choose from. And for this demo, I am just selecting brushes that we've already made. I'm steering away from brushes that I already own, just to illustrate the point. But look at this, we chose that gritty brush as a dual brush. And now I've got almost like this chalk effect here. So now I have these brushes, and I'm not sure which version of Photoshop has this kind of layer setup. I think it's in the last couple of years it's done so. But what you can do is just make a new brush group, call it set 2. And now I can just go through and choose the brushes that I actually set up to work. And now that I have this set up, let's time lapse through sort of my typical sketching process using a little bit of photos, but mostly the brushes I just created. And this is going to form part of an environment design for production course that I'm building at the moment. So if you're curious about environment concept art, design, production pipeline, I'm developing a fairly comprehensive course at the moment that's going to cover concept art fundamentals, the production pipeline, and that's going to lay the foundation for a full environment design package that we're going to work through. So if that interests you, do sign up to the mailing list below. And if you'd like to play around with the brushes that I created in this tutorial, you can download them now for free from my digital artist resource pack on Gumroad, which I'll link below as well. So we have some traditional feeling brushes. However, these don't cover all of the use cases that you might need for certain other tasks when you're digitally painting in Photoshop. So check out this video here if you want a detailed breakdown of creating some rock and foliage brushes in Photoshop.